Good afternoon, Farmville. This is Noma Sarge here with you again, welcoming you to another great episode of the Farmville Spotlight, your monthly showcase of local talent where we deep dive into the heart of the Farmville creative scene. Isn't that lovely? And today we have a special guest. John Guinther is with me today, saxophonist. Is that what you call him? A saxophonist?
Yeah, if they're good enough.
Oh, John, I'm so sorry. I should have mentioned, if you could have the mic closer to your mouth.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, that would be perfect. Try that again?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect,
right,
perfect. Me? Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So, I always say eat the microphone. That's the best way. You can never go wrong with that. But
well, I'm eating it.
All right, well, there we go, John. So, you've been playing saxophone now for how long has it been?
I started like a lot of kids in the fourth grade, and I picked up an instrument, and I wanted to play trumpet, but they were already taken, so I took the saxophone.
Interesting how that works.
And I played in band for through high school, and then I stopped for a while. And I picked it up again when I realized that I wanted something to do, something to work towards. And I've been playing for the past 4 years pretty consistently. But I've really picked up practicing really only in the past few months with the alto again.
Mm-hmm.
So there's I play two different kinds of saxophones. One's alto saxophone, it's a little
tenor.
smaller, and tenor saxophone, it's a bit bigger. Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask a question I'm sure a lot of people have on their mind. Why not the accordion?
My grandfather played the accordion, actually.
Interesting, yeah.
I had an accordion as a kid, but I sucked.
The accordion is one of the funniest instruments because it looks like a piano. It should be a piano, but it's got like the air, the little bellows.
It's like a harmonica. It's called a free reed instrument.
A free reed.
Yep, and you act as the bellows yourself, and you pull it out and push it in, and that's how the air gets through the reeds, and that's how it makes sound.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You can really, emphasize moments in the song with that, I'm sure, give it a little extra push.
Luckily, I'm not here to play accordion.
Okay, well, yes, you are here to play saxophone.
A little bit.
And the thing I find interesting, John, is you have been practicing, but you don't really perform a whole lot, but you have this, is it fair to say, a deep love for this instrument, the saxophone?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm an amateur. I'm not a very good player. I'm getting better. But I play jazz. I love jazz. After my grandfather died, I inherited his record collection, and I started listening and listening and listening and listening, and that's eventually what got me back into playing. I wanted to participate. It's hard to find people who want to play. So I play mostly by myself, and I practice at home. I don't record a lot. Sometimes I record just to hear how I sound. But I like to play standards. I like to play swing. I like to play basic bebop stuff like modern jazz that I can play to the best of my ability. Not very well.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that a lot during this interview. I humble myself.
I can play the saxophone not very well, though.
I play with the saxophone.
Yeah. You play around with the saxophone. Right. Now, let me ask you something, John. Because I'm not a musician, I can't play any instruments, and I'm proud of that fact. I actually tried to I tried to pick up the drums because I was like, that's an instrument that, like, even if somebody wanted to hear me play, I would have to move a whole drum set. It's not a very easily transportable instrument. So
no, it's not easy to practice.
Not easy to practice either. I could actually play some of but not very good at all. So. But I wanted to ask you. So you say you record your music sometimes to listen back to it. Is it similar when you listen back to a recording? Is it similar to the same feeling you get when you hear your voice on a recording? Where you're just like the anxious and just like, this is uncomfortable to listen to.
It's exactly like that, and it's like that with most of the musicians that I've been friends with.
That's amazing.
People don't like to hear themselves play because we're our own worst critic, and we know how much work we have to do. So we hear every mistake and on and so forth. Listeners, audiences tend to be much, much more forgiving.
Interesting.
People, I think, myself included, when I'm out listening to music, are just grateful for the opportunity to be able to hear music and have people show off, and it's a joyful thing. It's good. So It's not something to be embarrassed about, I think, which is why I'm here. If I were really embarrassed about my playing, I wouldn't be here. I can play a little bit, but it's something to work toward over a long, long time, and I hope to continue to get better, and I hope to keep playing, and I hope to be playing, when I'm in my 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and so on. And jazz is a music that is very, very deep, and so it's there's, God knows, there's plenty to play and much room for improvement. All the time.
Interesting. I'm going to be jumping around a lot because I love jazz. Well, that sounds pretentious coming from me, but I do love it so much. And I heard a thing, I don't know how true this is, but a lot of the old jazz players used to smoke marijuana. Is that true? Do you know anything about that?
Oh yeah, that's true.
Is there anything, because from my experiences with marijuana, which is not a lot, but everything just is slow, but I can see how that is beneficial in music almost, because you can almost, I don't know, I feel like it could be good for interpreting maybe songs and
Sure. Well, I'm more of a historian than a player anyway, so I can talk about this. In the 30s and 40s, this hipster subculture started to emerge around swing and jazz music, and a lot of the players and a lot of the fans did smoke marijuana, and some famous examples would be Cab Calloway, who wrote a couple of songs about weed, and most of the players, honestly, Nat King Cole, lots of saxophone players, Charlie Parker, and not just marijuana. There were other drugs in the mix there. A lot of alcoholism in the music industry in general.
A lot of bad livers walking around.
A lot of bad livers and lots of heroin abuse. But as for how it affects marijuana, how it would affect somebody's playing, honestly, I think that those players were so comfortable with what they were doing, and they did it every night, and they practiced and practiced and practiced, and they were the best of the best. That they didn't really have to think very much. Charlie Parker said, "You practice so much and over and over and over again that you don't. The point is that you don't have to think about it, and the music just comes out."
Interesting.
So maybe in a slightly altered state of mind, maybe it's the relaxation. It would actually help some of that music flow out. No, I can't speak to that.
Yeah. Okay. I know there was that one very strange album John Coltrane put out. I think you might know which one I'm talking about. I think it was Om or Omni, maybe.
Oh yeah. Om. Yeah.
Om. Yeah. Is that it? I don't know. I listened to the whole album, but it was very bizarre, and I heard that was near his. I think they released that actually after his death, maybe.
Yep.
And I think from what I read about it, he and his band members were on LSD at the time recording that, or at least that's what the rumors are.
That could be possible.
Yeah.
Coltrane, who I think is probably the greatest saxophone player ever. Although I wouldn't want to sound like him. If I could really, really, really play, I wouldn't play like John Coltrane. Although I think that he's probably the greatest saxophonist ever, and a great musician and a pillar of jazz, because he encompassed all of the passion and even his religion in his music. He struggled with heroin addiction and alcohol in the 1950s. He got kicked out of Miles Davis's quintet, actually, for that, and then eventually rejoined after he kicked the habit. But he became very spiritual after he kicked drugs, and he never did heroin, and he did not drink for the rest of his life, although experimentation with LSD, I don't know, possibly. But he started to play this music in the mid-1960s. In the last couple of years of his life, he died in 1967, of cancer, of, I think, the liver, something to do with hepatitis that may have stemmed back to his years as a junkie. But he started playing. The word that jazz musicians use referring to this kind of music is that he went out. Further out.
Interesting.
Kind of into outer space territory where music is concerned. And at the time, it was very revolutionary because, nobody had played that type of music before, and some people call it free jazz. He also played kind of spiritual jazz. It's hard to categorize. Sometimes putting labels on things is not the most useful thing.
Yeah.
But he played music that a lot of people at the time, even people who were huge fans of his, thought was not music. They couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm curious. What did you think of the album?
That album is actually it's very bizarre. I will say it was not an enjoyable experience, but it was really interesting. And I say it's not enjoyable because like it wasn't meant to sound pleasant.
Right,
that's
not
like
melodic.
Exactly, and that's obviously what he was going for, and so I'll give it to him. Like, you know, he did exactly what he was trying to do, which is not my style. But I believe he had even like animal noises on the just like sheep and like just pigs squealing.
Yeah,
and it was just like it's so not jazz. It's so, like you said, out there, kind of like far out, man, you know, very kind of like weird. But it was, I just can't imagine that kind of music being recorded like that.
There was a lot of that kind of music being recorded at the time. And there's about 120 years of jazz history now, and in terms of recorded stuff, over 100 years. So there's a huge amount of music under that umbrella. Stuff that doesn't sound melodic at all, creative improvisation, sort of like what John Coltrane was doing at the end of his career. And from that to New Orleans jazz, Louis Armstrong, all of that stuff, and swing, big bands, bebop, and people are still playing music, not just in New York City.
That's right.
Some of us in Farmville, I guess.
I do want to touch on that, but I do want to harp back a little bit about what you were saying, that you like think John Coltrane is the best, but you wouldn't want to sound like him, or on the lines of that. Right. Like, so I guess do you believe that like he's probably the most like skilled saxophonist, or just like how his passion carried him?
The passion. Well, he was immensely technically gifted. He was an incredible musician, and he could play bebop. There's an anecdote from the 50s when he was with Miles that he would play these amazing blistering solos, and he asked Miles, how do I end my solos? I can't figure out how to end it and just get back to it. And Miles said, take the horn out of your mouth. He was an amazing technician. Yeah, but he also embodied, I think, the artist in music. Somebody who was really, really trying to push boundaries, but selflessly, trying to absolutely express himself in musical terms, and I think that's a very, very noble thing. Yeah. So. That's why I think he's the best.
How important is it for a jazz musician, just like yourself, to be around other jazz musicians to kind of have that like experience of like maybe playing together or like kind of talking about the genre?
Oh, incredibly important, and that's probably why I'm not as good as I could be. Well, no, the point is, you inspire each other to be better, but also jazz is a collaborative music. Yeah. Think of a big band, for instance. That's like, it can be 11 to 18 musicians. Think of a small quartet with saxophone, piano, bass, drums. That's 4 musicians interpreting songs together, and you have to listen to each other, and you have to play off of each other, and it's really important to have that kind of ESP, extrasensory connection with the other musicians in the group. And the best jazz groups in history have all been people who really, really gel well together and understand each other as far as music goes. And so it's very, very important to have people to play with. And I think that as a learning musician, speaking about myself, it's often the best thing to be the worst musician in the room, and the worst thing to be the best musician in the room. Because if you're the best musician in the room, you're not going to learn as much from the people around you.
Yeah.
If you are the least experienced musician in the room, there might be a lot to learn, but you have all of that. You're surrounded by that, and you can only get better, really, when you put into that kind of position.
I actually love that mindset of being like, just come in as, inexperienced, or just like be okay with failure. I feel like could be like another good thing to, add to that. Because like, again, like if you just kill, like with the saxophone, if you just like you're out there and you're jamming and everybody's just applauding loudly and just like soaking it up, that's great and good for you, but you're not going to learn much from that experience versus if you are inexperienced and you sound maybe not the best, but like you kind of like, and I imagine like having like a group of jazz musicians could like help with that too. And that's like when the jiving thing comes along with that as well. The ESP, I like that.
That's how I think of
that's
it.
That's a very good way to look at it.
Yeah, it's funny because I saw a guitarist a couple of weeks ago in Richmond. His name is Larry Carlton.
Okay,
he played with Steely Dan. He was he played with a lot of people, and he was in a jazz group called jazz funk band called the Crusaders, and he recalled going on tour with Steely Dan in the 90s. He had played a famous solo on a song called Kid Charlemagne on their album The Royal Scam in the late 70s. And when he went on tour, he opted to relearn the famous solo because that's what people were going to be expecting. And they toured like 10 cities, 10 shows. He nailed it every time, and then they got to L.A. and he totally screwed up the solo. He said whatever it was, the energy just wasn't there tonight, and he messed it up. And this is after decades of being a professional musician. People just have these moments.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect. But he said that next day in the LA Times, it said guitarist Carlton flubs famous solo.
Oh no!
It was in the news in the entertainment.
That's
section.
a terrible thing to wake up to.
It's funny though.
That's almost worse than an earthquake hitting LA at that point. Just like as a musician, being like, "Oh no!" like
it's funny though,
yeah.
And I think it just speaks for the fact that musicians, it's a lifelong journey.
Yeah.
And even if you're the greatest, even if you've played with the greatest people, you have your off days. But the point is, there's always more to learn, and there's room to grow because music is infinitely expressive in that sense.
I would have to agree with that. And now, how do you go about like learning new pieces? Do you have like a certain way to practice that it's like a ritual almost for you?
Yeah, I do actually. So I'll preface this by saying a lot of jazz musicians in the old days, and I'm talking like 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, those guys, they played a lot as kids, but a lot of them were really self-taught. And so I think that self-taught musicians, although it's not the most efficient way of learning music necessarily, have a better chance of having their own sound. Not because they come up with it on their own, but because they're not going to be
reliant, maybe.
Put into a box necessarily. And the way I do it is usually I'll play along with the tune. I'll have music playing, and I'll play along with it. And I'll write these little chord charts for myself, and I'll teach myself the chord progression and the harmonies of the tune so that I can, take my little solos over it. But the most important part of learning a piece, in my opinion, is you got to nail the melody. You really need to be, especially if you're going to play a ballad or you're learning, an old swing standard, you need to be able to sing it through the saxophone. And that goes for any instrument. Because a lot of these tunes are tunes that had lyrics written for them. They were written for singers. And you really want to be able to approximate the expression of the human voice in whatever instrument you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's really important to learn the melody over and over and over again, and then work on the other stuff. So I'll work on the melody a lot, and then I'll noodle around, I'll solo, and I like to come up with little solos on songs. The tune I'm going to play today, I actually only learned in the past 5 days.
Oh, wow.
I had been listening to it last week, a couple of different versions, and I thought I want to learn this, and then I had been practicing it, so I decided, you know what, I guess I'll try and play that on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Nat King Cole
Wow.
song.
Okay, great. I love Nat King Cole. This is going to be very exciting. What time are we at? We have still, we can run over a couple more things. I did want to ask you, John, from your personal experience and your story, what was some of the hardest, hardships that you've dealt with, like learning this instrument, or is it just the consistency of doing it over and over again?
Consistency can be hard, especially when you have a full-time job.
Yeah.
You have a lot of responsibilities. Devoting yourself to something that's difficult is it's not an easy thing. It takes determination. Sometimes I practice when I don't really feel like practicing. You don't always feel like getting better, but I'm determined to get better, so I try. But honestly, the saxophone's impossible. It's not an easy instrument.
Yeah.
So the way that air is produced or sound is produced from a saxophone is like this. You have a brass tube, basically, with a bunch of keys on it. But essentially, it's just a brass tube. And you have a mouthpiece that goes on that's chambered to a certain size, and then you have a reed, a small piece of cane, that goes on that, and it's the vibrations from the reed on the mouthpiece that you play with your mouth that gives the saxophone its tone, and it's a column of air down the instrument that produces the sound. And when you have all of the keys closed, you get a lower note because it's using the whole tube. But then when you have keys open, the tube, that column of air, becomes shorter. And so it's a wind instrument. It's kind of between a brass and a wind instrument. It's a wind instrument, but it's difficult because unlike something like a bass, I also play a little bass guitar. I can play bass for once a month, say, and I will. If I pluck on the E string on the bass, it will sound exactly the same, even if I haven't played for a month. That's how the bass works. But with the saxophone, there's Louis Armstrong played trumpet, of course, but he has this quote. He said, "If I don't practice for one day, I can tell. If I don't practice for 2 days, the band can tell. If I don't practice for 3 days, the audience can tell." And with wind instruments, it's like working out. If you stop for a couple of weeks, you're going to be weaker when you come back to it. So it's not just making music, it's also practicing getting a better sound out of the instrument and improving your tone. And so it's frustrating, actually. I've been playing alto a lot more lately because I think that this particular saxophone that I have is better suited to me than the tenor that I have. The tenor saxophone that I have is also an old instrument. They're both old. The tenor was made in 1960.
Wow.
It's a good horn, but there's intonation issues, and it's a pain for me to get certain notes out. And it's got old-fashioned key work, and it's a little bit harder to get around the horn. This alto was actually made in 1952. And
nice.
It's a different make. It's a Busher, and it's a professional model saxophone. These would have been top of the line back in 1952 when it was made. And it's a great horn. I love it. It has great intonation. It plays well. It plays easier than the other horn. So I found a good match with this horn, and I've enjoyed practicing more because of that, I think.
Nice. Well, I'm very excited to hear this piece. And did you want to play that now a little bit? Or do you want to... We don't have to.
Well,
how do you feel?
I feel. I mean, it's gonna either way. I'm either gonna totally flub it, or I'm gonna nail it, and either way, nobody cares. It's fun.
Is like us not jumping into that part right now, like building tension for you? Just like
no, not really.
Okay.
No, not at all. If you have some more questions,
oh yeah, sure, yeah. I mean, I would definitely love to ask you. So, like, you practice a lot. And you do perform some, but not very often. Performing is that a good like indicator on like how your skill level is getting improved? Like seeing how the audience is like responding to the music. Also, I'd like to ask you, why don't you play around Farmville?
Well, okay, so I'll answer a couple of questions.
Okay, sure.
Right, so I think that performing is inspiring.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a drive to get better, because if you know you're going to be playing in front of people, you have a greater sense of urgency. Mm-hmm. You want to practice more so that you don't suck as bad. So I think that regularly performing is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. Mm-hmm. That's probably I want to, and why I don't play around Farmville is because I haven't had a group of people that I have found who want to play the kind of music that I want to play. It's very old-fashioned music, and I think that work is in the way a little bit with my schedule. But I had considered going and taking classes at Longwood and trying to join the band there. That would be fun. But I need to find some people to play with. So if you know anybody, point them my way.
Or anybody who's listening who also happens to play the saxophone or
any instrument and just wants somebody to play jazz with, I would love to do that.
Can you mesh well with a guitar? Like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Jazz, a little saxophone and guitar action.
A cool thing about guitar is that you can play great solos, and you can play these single note lines, and you can kind of shine. But guitar is also a chordal instrument, so that you can play harmonies and you can play rhythm, and you can really nail down the foundation of the song while somebody else is maybe soloing, or you can play together and create more interesting harmonies. Guitar, piano, bass, drums can be a rhythm section. That's what we call a rhythm section. Okay. It could be any combination of those things. Mm-hmm. I've heard recordings that don't have a drummer or a bassist. I've heard recordings that just have a drummer, but a full rhythm section would be piano, bass, drums, and hypothetically guitar. Okay. Or guitar, bass, drums. And I, as a person who plays bass guitar, I'm jealous of people with hands small enough to play a six-string guitar. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's just because I'm so used to the strings being so big, but every time I pick up a regular guitar, it's like I have gigantic hands, and my fingers are all over all the strings.
A little claustrophobic, maybe.
Every instrument's got its own challenges. Yeah. In addition to being like a guitar, one of the great things about guitar is that you can modify your tone relatively easily. Mm-hmm. Whereas on a saxophone, it's so manual that you have to work towards getting a tone, and on guitar, you can modify it relatively simply, or you can get a different kind of guitar or whatever. Yeah. Sorry.
I was going to ask you though. Again, well, not again, but you said you did perform a couple of times in front of like an audience. Do you have a most memorable moment performing live in front of people? Because like I'm a huge fan of like open mics. I think that's where like the where the tire meets the road. Really, like an open mic atmosphere there's a weird tension always.
Yeah, and a spontaneity of everything.
There's a spontaneity. There's usually drunk people as well. If it's a good open mic, or a bad open mic, but it's just like something about open mics. I just love the atmosphere. Love watching the people mess up. Or not even mess up, just like perform, and then sometimes like they'll make like make an accident or like, they'll like screw something up on the guitar or whatever instrument they're playing, and it almost like adds to the song, weirdly enough. I don't know if that makes sense, but like the like little mistakes that people make in a live performance almost like brings it up to something more.
It's real.
It's a real thing. Yeah. Like mistakes are amazing at open mics.
The most memorable performance that I've had, I forgot what I was playing in the middle of what I was playing. It was terrible. I was probably only in like the 10th grade or something.
Yeah. Oh no.
And we were playing, I think we were playing Fantasy by Earth, Wind, and Fire. And I had a solo. And I had nailed the solo so many times in rehearsal, but when I was in front of all those people, my mind went blank.
Yeah.
It started right, and I played probably 8 bars, and then I was like a vegetable. I became paralyzed, and I just couldn't. The best thing to do in that situation is just blow into the instrument and see what comes out.
Oh
just
my goodness!
Play.
Yeah.
But I didn't, and I should have. But I didn't. But there's as far as other performances I've seen, I was watching this video actually pretty recently. One of the greatest jazz guitarists ever was Wes Montgomery, and he was a self-taught player who was a welder by day and then played at night. And he many sleepless nights because he would work long hours, and then he would practice, and then he would play in bars and on the scene, and then he would sleep for 3 hours, and then he would go back to his day job until he became such a proficient musician and developed notoriety to the extent that he could actually tour full time and play as a musician full time, and he became one of the best-selling jazz musicians of the 1960s. And he had great success, but probably partially because of that work ethic, he died of a heart attack.
Oh, wow.
I think he was 41. I can't remember.
That is young.
Actually, yeah. But he had a performance recorded, video recorded on BBC. This was in London, I assume, in 1967, I think. And he played this fantastic solo, and then he ended it. He didn't end it, but it was toward the end of the solo. He played a note that was clearly wrong, and he glanced at the camera, winked, smirked, and then got back to it. And it was clearly an accident. Yeah. And it goes to show that even the greatest players will hit a wrong note or
flub a line. Yeah.
And in that sense, there is no such thing as a wrong note.
Yeah.
So long as you keep playing.
That's right. And not do what you did in the 10th grade. That is a nightmare. I can't imagine.
It was not fun.
Just I can't imagine hearing a saxophone and then just dead like radio silence, just like in the middle of it, and then just boom. It's just like such an abrupt. Yeah. Like when you stop playing the saxophone, that is abrupt versus like a guitar where it kind of like almost fades out naturally. Yeah. It's just like boom. That's over. That's very interesting, John. And I guess I would want to ask you, any young jazz musicians that are like listening right now, which might be one, realistically, none, but like there might be one young jazz musician. What would be like some key advice you would give to your younger self, especially now since you've like kept it up and you haven't given up yet? It's like, do you have anything that might like be beneficial for people just starting out with the instrument?
Yeah, don't overthink it. Do it a little bit every day. If you can't stand it, find another instrument. If you if you feel like you're not getting better, find a good teacher. A good teacher goes 1,000 miles. Somebody who's patient and attentive and who was probably once in your shoes as a young musician. But really, don't be afraid of playing with other people. Don't be afraid of joining a band. Don't be afraid of playing at the school talent show. Don't be afraid of auditioning for the school jazz band. Just don't be afraid of playing, because music is not something that is meant to be solitary. And it can be very solitary for me because I practice at home alone a lot, and that's where I play. But it's meant to be a joyful communal thing. And jazz music started as a very, very communal music. It developed in New Orleans in the early 1900s, and there were marching bands and brass bands and funeral bands and parlor pianists, and there were always people. And it filled a role, like people would follow these marching bands, these precursors to jazz bands, on these Creole funerals in New Orleans, and they would march with the bands, and the bands would be playing these, this very funereal music. And then as soon as they got to the cemetery and they took the casket and put it in the hole in the ground, the band would turn around and start playing party music, and that's what everyone was really there for.
Wow.
And they would start marching back the other way, and everyone would join them for that. It's a very, very life-affirming thing.
Yeah.
And I think that any young musician should remember that it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole point.
Is that how you would want your funeral carried out, by the way?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
That sounds like a blast, to be honest.
Really, I'd like my ashes put into the
a saxophone and then
blown out like a
Okay.
tuba, and then
tuba. There you go.
Blast the tuba and just blow it out. That would be great.
That sounds like a really great idea, and I hope nobody steals it. Wow. Well, John, if you're ready to, go ahead and kind of give us what you got and what you practice,
Sure.
I'm here for it.
Awesome. Maybe we can talk a little bit afterwards because I don't.
Absolutely,
have
absolutely.
a lot of music prepared.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
I'm going to play. So this tune was Nat King Cole's biggest hit.
Mm-hmm.
It was recorded in 1943 and released in 1944. It stayed on the Harlem Hit Parade for, I think, 10 weeks.
Wow.
And there were a lot of covers. Andrew Sisters did a cover in 1944. There's infinite versions of this song. It's a famous one. It's called Straighten Up and Fly Right. You might have heard it.
Yeah.
I am going to play a couple of notes and just kind of warm up, and then I'll just count it off, and we're going to see whether I fly or whether I scrape along the ground.
Absolutely.
It's going to be fantastic.
I'm here for it, and exactly, it's going to be fantastic either way. It's going to be entertaining and joyful, by the way.
Absolutely.
And yes, hopefully we don't have to have a funeral march afterwards, because that would be unfortunate. So we'll let John warm up and just kind of...
Help me get the mic into the right...
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Let's see. All right, ready? Which mic are we using?
We're using the blue one right there. Yep.
Okay.
Perfect.
Sweet. Ready?
Yeah.
All right.
Ready when you are.
Cool. I'm going to count myself off.
Okay, he's going to count. Okay.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Wow, that is amazing. That was good. Do you have another one, or was that it?
No, that's what I'm going to play today.
Perfect. Well, thank you, John. Appreciate that. Let me set your mic back up real fast. I got to say, that was incredible. And thank you so much for playing that. Like, I appreciate you taking the time to practice that. It was so good. And honestly, I mean, like, I've seen jazz being played before, and I've seen people play saxophones, but like seeing it like right now, like across from you, I'm just like, all he's doing is just a little movement of the face, you know. But like, that's all it takes to have that like impact. And it just had a very like upbeat kind of like feel to that song. Very like warm.
That was a tiny little version. I had prepared a solo and a couple of other things, and it would have been 3 or 4 minutes. But
yeah.
This is the first time I've performed in front of anybody other than my roommate in 5 years.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness.
That's why it was so short.
Well, thank you. Thank you, John, for that.
I'm trying to get back out there.
Yeah. So. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, a good way to start, too, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you played that, and yeah, man, that's just very cool. I hope you can find, like, some band people to kind of like, you know, because just to kind of have that like collaboration again too, because like that'd be really cool. I'd love to see I don't know about you. Well, I do. I mean, I would love to see like a jazz band in Farmville, or like just that would be amazing. And like, I feel like this is the town to do it. There's a lot of buildings with brick, and I feel like brick is a very like 1940s like New York jazz scene kind of feel. And I'm like, where's the jazz players? You know, but. Yeah, amazing. How difficult was that for you to play?
To play, not difficult at all. That's an easy tune.
Okay.
Honestly, the hardest thing for me
is the anxiety.
The anxiety is getting the sound out of the instrument. Yeah.
Do you think that's why a lot of those guys were drinkers?
I don't know. Well, I feel like it's one of those things. I feel like they were drinkers because people didn't appreciate. Where were they playing?
Yeah.
Bars a lot of the time. So I think it just coincides.
Exactly.
But, no, I think that those guys were all very comfortable with what they were doing because A, they'd been doing it for so long, and B, that means that they've screwed up in front of audiences so much.
So many times, just insensitive. Jaded almost.
Immune to it at that point. Yeah. Do you have any more questions?
Oh yes, I'm sorry, John.
No, it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you know, we did kind of cover like your biggest musical like influences. I feel like, and I would have to agree, John Coltrane, one of the best. Such a classy guy, getting kicked out of bands. You know, such a class act. But. And again, I guess I would like to ask you, like improvising jazz. Do we really talk about this like a whole lot? Like about you know, just like feeling it out. Just like, you know, if somebody's like playing a song and you just kind of go in there. Do you do a lot of improvisation?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So it's funny. I did not solo on the tune that I just played. I just played the melody and I ended it. But 99% of what I do when I play on my own is practice improvisation. It's the heart of jazz, and it's it can be as structured or unstructured as you want it to be, because you can either just play the changes and you can play through the harmonic framework of a song in the inside right way, or you can do what Coltrane was doing in the late 60s and just fly off the handle and kind of see where the horn takes you. I've gotten pretty decent at playing old swing tunes like that, but the first jazz bands, they improvised at the same time a lot of the time. Dixieland, the guys would play simultaneously, and they would all be soloing. Well, they wouldn't be soloing. You wouldn't call it soloing because it was simultaneous. So they were all improvising together, and slowly over time it became more of a thing where certain musicians would the soloists would solo and the rest of the band would kind of back up and let them do their thing, except for the rhythm section, which usually is very much involved in whatever the soloist is doing. Even if it just sounds like a backdrop, there's a lot of interaction going on, which is important. That's the ESP thing that I talked about.
Backbone of jazz, the secret hidden backbone. Yeah. What do you think about the current state of jazz? Because like I'm mostly listening to, and if I'm listening to jazz, it's like the older John Coltrane era, like 1940s, 50s, 60s type. But I mean, I know you're more like with the you know a lot about the jazz scene, like new and old. What does current jazz look like? And is there any way to go back in time?
Well, there's everything.
Yeah.
People are playing everything.
Again, yeah.
I've seen funk guitarists in jazz bands. I've seen. I see a lot of straight-ahead jazz that's more along the lines of what you would expect from 40s and 50s jazz. I've seen. I saw Wynton Marsalis and Jazz at the Lincoln Center in Raleigh a couple of months ago, and they were playing a lot of Duke Ellington tunes, Count Basie tunes, all these big band arrangements. I saw. Let's see. There are people very much active, still playing very, very, very out free jazz, avant-garde music. I call it skronk sometimes because sometimes it does sound like people are making animal noises out of their instruments. But there are people playing all manner of jazz. From Dixieland to free jazz, from bebop to hard bop to jazz funk to cool jazz to
so many different branches to go down.
It's over 100 years of history, so there's a lot of music in there.
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good way to wrap it up in my book. But beautiful instruments, and again, you got to take a look at this beauty. It has a patina on it. The saxophone. It's just a lovely instrument, and also this is totally unrelated to jazz. So, but I'm going to just throw it out there. You mentioned this was like a professional grade back in 1950s, right? It was like the top of the line. I always wondered what it would be like to buy like the top of the line 1995 VHS player. Like it was like something that's just like kind of mediocre. Like how good
very obsolete
is exactly?
Now,
It's just like buy it for $5.
Well, the truth is that saxophone manufacturing has advanced a lot in the past 60 years, but not that much. Yeah. It's not the difference between VHS and
DVD
4K,
or exactly.
Blu-ray, whatever.
Yeah.
This is still a very good horn. If you put this horn in the hand of somebody who really knew the instrument, it would sound about as good as anything out there.
And I'm sure there's like advantages to using the older instruments as well versus like the new, because like there's just some things in the old that you can't get.
That's true, especially if you're trying to play old-fashioned.
Yeah. Well, John, I appreciate you coming out. Thank you so much. Do you want to plug any sort of like anything? Any shows? I know you got no shows, but well, what would be some like sage words of advice you would give? Just some like a final. I know you kind of gave that.
I think that everyone should play an instrument.
Yeah.
In fact,
good point. Even me?
The best. Yes, I do.
Oh no.
There's actually, we talked about John Coltrane a couple of times. He had a quote. It's one of my favorite quotes about music, period. And it's, "You can play a shoestring if you're sincere."
That's amazing. That's so beautiful.
The point is, you can play music with anything.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be good.
Yeah.
Just look at me.
Yeah. Oh, you're a true inspiration.
Oh, yeah.
Well, thank you, John, for coming out. And that wraps up another episode of the Farmville Spotlight. Huge thank you to John today for coming out and being the featured act. And remember, local talent is the heartbeat of the community, so keep supporting and celebrating those who make Farmville special. We'll be back next month with another musician and some more stories here on the Farmville Spotlight. This is Noah Massarge signing off.